A sea of flags planted at the Washington Monument to honor the over 200,000 victims of the coronavirus in the United States, a national death toll representing 1/5 of the global death toll from COVID-19.
This was preventable. Not all of it, but much of it. And what could be lost in the future is preventable too, if we embrace science. Science instead of politics.
While a nation mourned, this was the scene at a campaign stop for President Trump. Hundreds of his supporters, many not wearing masks, and no social distancing in sight. And despite the staggering toll, the president continues to mock mask wearing.
You ever see Sleepy Joe with the little circles? He puts them very far away, so far away, and then he comes up with the mask. He's like 100 yards from the nearest human being. He's got a mask. He feels good about the mask. I wonder, in the debate, it'll be him and I or the stage. Is he going to walk in with a mask?
Comments like this have hurt the president's standing, with several polls showing a majority of Americans, some as high as 68%, don't trust what President Trump says on coronavirus.
Due to Donald Trump's lies and incompetence in the past 6 months have seen one of the gravest losses of American life in history. But sadly, it's not over. Once again, we're being told that we can save lives. This time, as many as I said, 110,000 lives, if we just take simple steps, chief among them wearing masks. And still the president refuses. In fact, we just watched him hold an indoor rally with thousands of people, many of whom weren't wearing masks, despite the clear evidence that we're putting every one of those people's lives at risk.
The other big fight shaping up is in the Senate, where Republicans appear to have the numbers to confirm late Liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement with a conservative-leaning nominee, expected to be announced on Saturday.
If our Democratic colleagues want to claim they are outraged, they can only be outraged at the plain facts of American history. There was clear precedent behind the predictable outcome that came out of 2016. And there's even more overwhelming precedent behind the fact that this Senate will vote on this nomination this year. The American people reelected our majority in 2016. They strengthened it further in 2018.
This is what Leader McConnell said in 2016, mere hours after the death of Justice Scalia. Quote, his words, "The American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy shall not be filled until we have a new president." No amount of sophistry can change what McConnell said then. And it applies even more so now, so much closer we are to an election.
As Ruth Bader Ginsburg's casket arrived at the United States Supreme Court, where it will lie in repose for 2 days. The big news overnight was the full-throated endorsement Democrat Joe Biden received from Cindy McCain, the widow of late Republican Senator John McCain. In a tweet, she said there was only one candidate in the race who stood up for American values, and while she doesn't always agree with Biden, she called him a good and honest man. Trump responded in a tweet of his own, and he hardly knows Cindy McCain, that he was never a fan of her husband, and that she can have Sleepy Joe. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
All right, for more of this, let's take you live now to New York and speak to SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Very good evening to you, Sherwin. Thanks indeed for your time as always. So days of public mourning for the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That will precede President Trump's nomination of the person he seeks to replace her with. Tell us more.
Essentially, President Trump, Griselda, giving Americans time to mourn the passing of the late Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, appointed to the court by former President Bill Clinton, serving 27 years, almost 3 decades of a legacy of pushing the court in terms of liberal causes, gender equality, better race relations in this country. So really leaving a huge vacuum on the court. Casket arriving at the Supreme Supreme Court today, where it will lie in repose for 2 days before being moved to the United States Capitol, where it will then lie in state. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in that sense, becomes the first woman to lie in state within the Capitol building in the history of the United States, and so really afforded some high privileges here, given her stature, certainly for those 27 years on the court. We also heard from Chief Justice John Roberts, who was among the justices welcoming that casket at the Supreme Court earlier. This is what he had to say.
It has been said that Ruth wanted to be an opera virtuoso, but became a rock star instead. But she chose the law. Subjected to discrimination in law school and the job market because she was a woman, Ruth would grow to become the leading advocate fighting such discrimination in court. She was not an opera star, but she found her stage right behind me in our courtroom. There she won famous victories that helped move our nation closer to equal justice under law, to the extent that women are now a majority in law schools, not simply a handful. Later, she became a star on the bench, where she sat for 27 years. Her 483 majority, concurring, and dissenting opinions will steer the court for decades.
John Roberts continuing, Criselda, in his tribute, he said Ruth's passing weighed heavily on her family, but the court was her family too. The Supreme Court building was her home. And of course, as I said earlier, she will be the first woman to lie in state on Capitol Hill on Friday.
So, Sherwin, we heard from the two leaders in the Senate, Republican Mitch McConnell and Democrat Chuck Schumer earlier. This nomination process is gearing up to be a real fight ahead of Election Day. Remind us why the stakes are so high.
Yeah, it's almost like pouring fuel on the fire that was the sort of divergent views in what has been billed the most important election in United States history. You quite correctly point out that this is now gearing up to be a huge fight in the Senate because it will reshape the court's 5-4 conservative majority to an even greater 6-3 majority in the absence of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the ability of the United States president now, who is a Republican conservative, to appoint a conservative-leaning justice. The stakes are even higher because in 2016, when Antonin Scalia died, the conservative-leaning justice on the court, in an election year, he died in February, allowing then President Barack Obama to appoint a replacement in Merrick Garland. But he famously, Merrick Garland did not get a vote on the Senate floor because Republicans at the time felt that it was an election year and that the people should weigh in on who they wanted appointed to the Supreme Court. The argument you now hear from Republicans is that, well, we had both the White House and control of the Senate in 2016, so it was a slightly different scenario from what you're seeing today, where the White House is controlled by Republicans and the Senate is controlled by Republicans. So essentially the same party has the ability now in 2020 to push through that nomination over the objections from Democrats who are crying foul. They're calling this the height of hypocrisy. The fact that many Republicans came out in 2016 to say you cannot do this in an election year because the stakes are so high, the American people need to weigh in. They're using the same argument now. Republicans, of course, disagreeing with that.
Something else also important, Sherwin, the U.S. yesterday passing the 200,000 deaths from COVID-19, representing 1/5 of all the deaths in the world. And yet there continues to be an inconsistent message from the U.S. political leadership on the wearing of masks.
Exactly correct, Criselda. There's a model out of the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. And what this model shows is by the 1st of January, some 400,000 people in the United States could die. So essentially from the 200,000 mark that we passed yesterday, they are now saying that in the next few months, before January 1st, that number could essentially double. And of course, we are now heading into cooler months here in the United States. Soon it will be autumn, and then it will be the United States, the Northern Hemisphere winter, which complicates things even further. They are saying that if mitigation efforts are universally applied, like social distancing and the universal wearing of masks, you could reduce the number of deaths by some 122,000 lives. We also heard from the WHO's Emergency Program Director, Dr. Mike Ryan, about the importance of having a consistent message from the various spheres of government. Let's listen to what he had to say about this, Griselda.
It is important that we have consistent messaging from all levels, and it's not for one country or one entity, or consistent messaging between science and between government, consistent messaging across all of the different topics here. This is complicated stuff. Data changes, information changes, evidence changes. So it isn't easy, and it isn't easy for everyone to be on message all of the time. But what it is important is that governments, scientific institutions step back, review the evidence, and give the most comprehensive, easy to understand and digest information so that people can take the appropriate action.
And so those divergent images, you saw Joe Biden wearing a mask at his political rally, and last night in Pennsylvania you saw President Trump and many of his supporters without the mask, in fact going as far as to mock Joe Biden's consistency in terms of wearing masks. And I think that really encapsulates the big debate in this country. You have mixed messages. It's become politicized in terms of the mitigation efforts that are required to constrain the spread of COVID-19. And as that model from the University of Washington tells us, the ramifications of that could be a death toll in excess of 620,000 people in the United States. That is astonishing on any level, whether you're the largest country in the world, the richest country in the world or not. 620,000 lives are at stake here. Griselda.
Sherwin, thank you very much. A comprehensive update. Thanks indeed. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent in New York. Thanks indeed for your time.